start the recording here. So you can start whenever you want. Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tian. This is my presentation on humanizing medicine through AI. The light of the synthetic dawn shines over a world in which automation dominates every facet of civilization, as mechanical computation becomes the best and potentially the only feasible means of processing data. This is the post-singularity world. Humanity is but fragments of its former self, surrounded by the sea of automation it has created. But as different future generations may seem, we will stand together, hand in hand, on our lonely island. Humanity must redefine its purpose to retain any semblance of sanctity of the human conscious experience in a world which the impact of human labor is greatly diminished. It is my belief that humanity's shared consciousness, being the emotional, spiritual, and philosophical resonance between all human beings, will survive as a core, if not the only function left for us in society, and that underappreciating such value is our greatest existential risk we face in the future. In essence, as the value of human labor diminishes, human emotion must prosper to take its place if acts of empathy and compassion are inextricable from human identity. Thus, I present the case for human beings, especially within the field of medicine. Medicine is, first and foremost, the practice of caring for a human being. In the future, narrow AI will dominate physicians in all technical abilities, but serve to complement them towards the goal of patient care. Outmatched by machines in delivering physical treatment, a physician's authentic expressions of care towards a patient will remain their most valuable asset. Thus, the role of AI in the future is to allow the heart of humanity within medicine to beat stronger than it ever has before, and tackle some of the big challenges in healthcare we face today. Practitioner overload and patient neglect are substantial and escalating problems in modern medicine. The practice of medicine is complex and technically demanding, with healthcare workers often experiencing high workloads and occupational burnout. As medicine develops and expands, so too does the demand for practitioners to keep pace with the accelerating amounts of new knowledge, data, and techniques, thus further exacerbating the issue of practitioner overload. This, alongside bureaucratic factors, diminishes the quality of patient care and in extreme cases results in patient neglect. Patient neglect is still a sensitive and poorly understood issue, but cases such as the Mid-Staffordshire Trust scandal, where routine failures of care resulted in up to 1,200 patient deaths, illustrates the real and disastrous effects of patient neglect that is systemic across healthcare institutions. Again, while there are numerous factors contributing to these crises, the adoption of high-performance, narrow AI can make a significant impact in addressing these problems. So just so that we're on the same page, what is narrow AI? Narrow AI is artificial intelligence designed and optimized to perform well-defined objectives, opposed to general or super AI that are designed with unrestricted goals to operate in any environment, conceivable or inconceivable to human beings. And they have the potential of surpassing human intelligence altogether through advanced emergent behavior. So examples of narrow AI in medicine are surgery assist tools, such as the Senhance surgical system that I have with the check mark underneath. They use multiple sensors and algorithms that are designed to improve the efficiency and minimize the invasiveness of surgery. An example of general AI, general AI would be like an AI doctor who is basically a normal doctor, but does everything better performance and unrestricted by human limitations like stress. Not to say general AI doesn't have the potential for positive change in medicine. I am making a case for how I see the future of medicine evolving. And to me, it seems narrow AI is the best, most appropriate machine learning technology to achieve holistic advancement in medicine, as the utility and performance of such AIs can optimize and complement the tangible objectives of healthcare. Narrow AI will revolutionize the efficacy of diagnosis and treatment, relieve occupational stress and technical burdens of medicine, and promote and streamline patient-oriented care to assist humans in humanizing the practice of medicine. From this point onwards, I will refer to AI as narrow AI. So documenting a patient's condition is vital to identifying disease and its corresponding treatment. However, practitioners must both acquire detailed descriptions from the patient, as well as ensure they feel heard and attended to, which are often difficult to achieve simultaneously in a limited amount of time. This is where speech transcription comes in. It is a very well-defined problem in AI and applies very well to this case. Designed specifically for the healthcare industry, the combination of speech recognition and transcription algorithms will have the capacity to transcribe a patient's description of their conditions to text, classifying it by the nature, such as the description of pain, location, family history, etc. This information can be sorted into disease profiles using medical terminology for use by healthcare practitioners. And thus, such AI can assist doctors in diagnosis and treatment process as well. But the primary objective here is to switch the focus from writing about the disease to hearing the patient's concerns. An interesting note, there is a plethora of research and entrepreneurial efforts in creating this technology today. So I suspect there will be a pilot stage sometime soon, in the next 5 years or so. I mean, if not, you can see me tackle this in the future as well. So alongside assisting physicians with diagnosis can be entirely delegated to AI in the future. Diagnostics, or medical tests used in the diagnosis and detection of disease, is one of the most important sectors of medicine. In this data-driven field, AI is set to revolutionize the process and make groundbreaking improvements to its accuracy and efficiency. This prospect of AI-driven radiology is already upon us, with a magnitude of research in the last decade and startup companies piloting their solutions around the world. Deep learning techniques, such as convolutional neural networks or CNNs, in quantitative brain MRIs have made big strides in tumor recognition in recent years. And AI diagnostic tools ever since have been racing to become the stethoscope of the 21st century. In January of 2020, a deep CNN-based algorithm trained on 2.5 million histological images resulted in a 94.6% accuracy of brain tumor diagnosis, performing better than pathologist-based interpretations of 93.9% accuracy. In July of 2020, a faster RCNN algorithm was able to detect and classify oral lesions for the early detection of oral cancer using only basic digital images of varying resolution, marking a dramatic increase in performance quality and flexibility in a very small window of time. Such algorithms are currently being used in hospitals by startup companies like Meadow AI, showing great promise in successful pilot stages implemented across Asia. Now, just imagine the sheer scope and future projection of diagnostic AI. In the future, alongside developments in nanotechnology and cloud computing, we can expect real-time cellular level diagnostics. The development of micro and nanoscale tools smaller than cells will help in understanding the cellular machinery at the single cell level and lead to massive improvements in diagnostic medicine. So the image on the left shows a preliminary experiment in which HeLa cells had those square polysilicon chips inserted, and they remained alive and healthy. The image on the right shows the theoretical number of transistors that can fit inside a cell. And this number is projected to increase over time with the development and downsizing of transistor technology. All kinds of mechanical, biomechanical, electrochemical processes can be studied with such machines, and as well as potentially being able to detect cancer at its earliest possible stage of intervention. Again, this technology has been around since 2010. Imagine the likes of this technology we can achieve in 5 or 10 years from now. With early stage cancer detection greatly improving survivability, being able to intervene the moment a small cluster of cancer cells emerges could virtually prevent all cancer-related patient deaths and mark an alternative, highly attractive solution to the cure for cancer. To operate on such minute scales, the AI surgical robot of the future will be able to train on a patient-specific surgical case to determine the optimal path of surgery with a 99.999% chance of success, having performed the surgery successfully millions of times within a perfectly simulated environment. Following this diagnostic revolution, AI will be capable of managing and analyzing the growing amounts of clerical and clinical data, sparing doctors the heavy technical demands brought by the drastic increases in technical capacity. This enables doctors to expand their hearts and ease their minds so they may do the same for their patients. Contrary to the fear that many may possess, the goal of such tools is not to fully replace those doctors, but to optimize and improve what they already do, whilst drawing the focus of human applied medicine on patient care rather than disease diagnosis and treatment. Indeed, as the focus shifts primarily to the patient with the aid of new technologies, new contexts of care can emerge. Artificial intelligence and personal assist devices such as Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, they can all create new contexts for patients to receive individualized care outside of formal healthcare settings. Personal assist technologies trained with healthcare data can provide post-treatment care for patients in the comfort of their own home. Patients may receive an overwhelming amount of information on their condition, the treatment they received, and the medication protocol they must follow after being discharged from a hospital. While it is expected that the patient should abide by such on their own, it can be especially difficult if their hospitalizing condition altered their alertness or lucidity during or after their treatment. A patient can thus feel unprepared, uncared for, or expedited through a system that is seemingly unaware of their needs. With an AI assistant, patients have a knowledgeable voice assisting them throughout the duration of their recovery. Patients and their families will be able to ask the AI assistant any question regarding the condition at hand or the treatment received, ensuring that everyone is informed and reassured of any concerns that might arise. With the ease in which medical information can be lost in translation or simply not written down, being able to confirm any and all important information and that is accessible to the patient at all times will ensure that they are prepared and can manage their own health while not feeling left behind by the medical system. AI assistants can also remind patients when to take their medication and any required or suggested post-treatment care they should receive to ensure their full recovery. Additionally, these assistants can stay with the patient long-term after their recovery, acting as a liaison for patients seeking medical help or advice in the future, as well as making lifestyle suggestions to improve a patient's quality of life and promote positive health practices. By extension, androids can fulfill the role of a personal nurse equipped with a calming human voice, but also the capacity for providing physical care. To reiterate, this AI would be of narrow intelligence, meaning it is designed for the execution of well-defined patient care objectives, such as mobility assistance and medical advising, not to outperform or replace nurses in their generalist role within healthcare. While such technologies can still present potential ethical challenges and friction with their human counterparts, the objective of an AI nurse would be to provide personalized in-home care on a scale that would be otherwise unattainable for human nurses. While the horizon of new contexts of care is boundless, so too can AI improve on current contexts of patient care. AI can be used to mediate encounters between patients and healthcare practitioners to provide a more patient-oriented approach to current healthcare practices. Patient-practitioner interactions are essential in medicine, both for physicians to understand, empathize, and resolve a patient's ailments, and for the patient to feel their concerns are being addressed by a compassionate and trustworthy person. While the goal of communication for a physician may be to diagnose and prescribe treatment, building a strong patient relationship should not come second place if a patient's reception to and feeling of care is valued. With AI assisting in the acquisition of patient information prior to visiting a healthcare practitioner, the focus of meetings and consultations can thus be centered around a patient's individual needs instead of profiling disease, providing an atmosphere of individualized and compassionate care for individuals seeking help. An excellent example of this would be pre-screening patients before visits to primary care doctors. Time is a scarce resource in a physician's office practice, with how the physician using their clinical time having important implications on the quality and on the care and patient trust quality. Patients often require assistance with multiple issues during an office visit, requiring physicians to divide time and resources to deal with their professional and moral responsibilities. With the median time for doctor's visits being around 15 minutes, it is challenging to balance formulating diagnoses and suggesting treatment options while ensuring compassionate care. Using an AI that pre-screens patients, not only would it alleviate physician time and resource strain, it can also revolutionize patient-centered care. This AI, such in the form of a mobile app, would engage in discourse with a patient whenever medical attention is required, building a comprehensive profile of the patient's medical concerns in simple language for the patient and medical terms for the physician. Having all relevant information, medical information beforehand, it allows the physician's attention to be centered around the patient. As well, physicians can have further discussions with the patient on the nature of their illness and its cause, the treatment options and outcomes, and lifestyle improvements in an overall more dynamic conversation that facilitates relationship building and patient agency over their own health. Another example of mediating encounters is in patient consults. Consults are essential to any surgical procedure, involving the assessment of whether a patient is fit to undergo surgery, if the benefits of the procedure outweigh the risk of complications, and the nature of a patient's recovery and progress after the procedure. While consults are highly valuable to a patient and their loved ones, it is often difficult for physicians to have the time to provide the desired level of detail and specificity that patients desire when assessing the complex nature of their condition and the proposed operation. Therefore, an AI could be used to provide an extended consult for patients. This AI would serve to ask or to answer any medical question following a doctor's initial consult, providing further details such as survival statistics, what recovery might look like, what the method of the procedure itself would be, and all designed with a comforting, user-friendly interface for the concerned party's ease of mind. Utilizing such AI can lower the stress of surgery for both practitioners and patients, bolstering patient confidence and compliance that is conducive to the well-studied positive effects of family-centered care. Another context improved by mediation is therapy. An AI can serve as the first interaction for individuals seeking mental health counseling or medical help, whilst remaining fully accessible to the individual at their convenience. This AI would collect information about their concerns in the form of a human-like dialogue, providing a framework for the individual to verbalize and understand their situation. Having learned parameters from the experience of other individuals, as well as the entire cumulative experience of therapy and psychiatric knowledge, this AI will have the option of actually providing the first line of therapy, counseling, or guidance. When a human therapist or psychiatrist is required, the AI having a detailed record of the individual situation and the specification of who they prefer, such as females feeling more comfortable with talking to a female advisor, this AI would find the professional that is best fit for them. From the practitioner side, having a detailed case and psychological profile allows them to better understand and prepare for in-person therapy. Such a system has the benefit of eliminating the need for an individual having to switch between multiple therapists and having to explain each time the trauma or turmoil which brought them to seek help in the first place, as well as being able to have the first initial counseling backed by all the available data within the study of mental health. Throughout their healing process, being able to return to the AI whenever needed can allow individuals to not feel alone on their journey of recovery, being able to receive help and reflect upon personal insights outside of scheduled sessions. The accessibility and personalization of therapy will greatly humanize the process of seeking mental help, as well as improve the communication and efficacy of in-person therapy. Further, on a foundational level, AI can completely change our understanding of mental health by analyzing the multidimensionality of the human psyche. First, some background. Psychiatric practice relies heavily upon intuition-based assessments that are frequently reinforced without good comparative evidence. The diagnosis of mental disorders is based on the criteria established in the DSM-5, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which contains descriptions of the afflicted and their presentation of symptoms. For decades, psychiatry has struggled to take advantage of the growing wealth of data-based analytics used by other fields of medicine. But with the implementation of unsupervised machine learning, it will be possible to reclassify psychiatric disorders and overhaul the way medicine approaches disease. Through the processing of multi-omics, which are metabolic, genetic, transcriptomic, that type of data, alongside clinical data, unsupervised machine learning algorithms can redefine the current diagnoses of psychiatric disorders into different groups based on that data, better capturing the dynamism and complexity of the mental health spectra. Not only can this enable individual level treatment predictions and personalized medicine, but it can also redefine our understanding of mental health as psychiatric profiles rather than explicit disorders. Machine learning models for depression, anxiety, and autism already illustrate the multidimensional causes of psychiatric symptoms, in which no discrete criteria for diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment can fit the same two individuals suffering the same DSM classified disorder. By reevaluating the nature of human psyche, or the nature of how we understand the human psyche, we can finally challenge the stigma surrounding mental health from an institutional level. The stigma surrounding mental health is a plague upon contemporary healthcare, as the fear of social discrimination degrades individuals and discourages them from seeking help. However, the relabeling of disorders as mental profiles can support individuals and humanize the process of seeking medical attention. Instead of seeking treatment to fix a disorder, the conversation can shift to an individual receiving adjustments to their mental profile to best fit their needs and desired way of life. Paradigm shifts in medicine are rapidly underway, and thus we must consider how the role of human healthcare practitioners will change in the future. Despite the potential for the complete mechanization of medicine, the need for human-to-human interaction will forever be in demand for suffering human beings. While it is acceptable that human social interaction is essential to every aspect of human health, humans will undoubtedly undergo dynamic and continual changes in society and even in human biology alongside our advancements in tech. Therefore, the nature and importance of interpersonal relationships must be investigated with a necessary redefinition of what it means to be human. If one's interaction with a true member of their kin is an inseparable essence of their being, then human-to-human interaction, such as doctors physically treating their patients, must be preserved for the well-being and identity of humanity as a whole. Therefore, even as the efficiency and efficacy of machine-applied medicine is bound to outclass humans, the demand for the human touch, emotion, and care, regardless of its medicinal merit, will remain valuable until the end of humanity as we know it. The notion that practitioners will assume administrative or regulatory roles is still debatable, as developments in AI administration and the parameterization of ethics can still threaten human labor within those roles. Therefore, there is a need to generalize and expand current medical professions. In the transitory stages of the synthetic dawn, practitioners will need to develop and apply multidisciplinary skills to enable AI in healthcare, as well as fill generalized roles that AI will initially find difficult in competently fulfilling. Examples include physicians being trained in both computing and medicine to aid in the creation and adoption of AI tools, which is actually an emerging role assumed by many radiologists today. Additionally, there needs to be a sharing of general responsibilities unilaterally amongst healthcare staff to support more comprehensive patient-oriented care to reduce the systemic and institutional causes of patient neglect. Most importantly, there needs to be a call to further emphasize human care in medical practice. For future generations of healthcare practitioners, this means being comfortable with the inevitability of AI-dominated medicine as compensatory to their physical limitations, and fostering the understanding that the nature of their role within medicine is embodying the quintessential virtues of empathy and compassion in human care. Thus, as the sun of the synthetic dawn encroaches upon the horizon, we ought to let our machines treat the disease so our practitioners can treat the human being. Thank you.
Okay, great. So any questions? I was thinking about how important words were in your presentation and how words are kind of the currency of medicine and everything. But don't you think, like, mind uploading may be a long way away, but part of mind uploading would be communication by thoughts, right?
Mhm.
And maybe that will be accessible sooner than people will want to do mind uploading. So that will change medicine dramatically, right? And it isn't simple, right? So once you're communicating by thoughts, how do you protect everything else that's in your head, you know? So we might argue that at the moment, one of the problems with medicine and particularly, you know, psychiatry is that words are not quite adequate. But they kind of protect us from, you know, sort of giving away everything that we don't want to necessarily share. So what are your thoughts about that? What will medicine be like when we're able to communicate via thoughts?
Um, I feel like communication is definitely it's only one aspect of care. Being in the vicinity of someone does have an effect on your perception, and you know, body language is example of a form of communication that we do that, you know, maybe not noticed immediately but has an effect, and it shows it communicates in a way that I feel like even thoughts wouldn't be able to transmit. And so there are multiple dimensions of how humans interact with each other. And I feel like all of those components will be necessary in care, in, you know, doctors treating their patients. So it might be the fastest way to communicate in the future, where you could just shoot a thought and then someone will just understand it. But again, there are still a lot of dimensions to how interaction works that, you know, those will still need to be there. It could just speed up, you know, talking, and maybe you fumble around with your words less, or maybe more. I'm not sure, but with that technology, it will help in that aspect, but it won't completely negate all the other elements of communication that are there.
Yeah. Other questions?
How do you think perceptions around privacy of information may either improve or deteriorate the relationship of the patient with the AI technology or practitioner?
Yeah, it's a very topical issue now, actually. I guess it depends on who owns that data. There's a lot of legal stuff that goes into it, but um, I feel that as long as the data is not accessible to the concerned parties, or it is just like like the purest form of a third party system as possible, that you could have, you know, all this data go to like a cloud computer, for example, and it will synthesize and process everything and then send it back. That data, as long as it can't be accessed, or if there's special permissions that the person making that data can grant permission directly, that system I feel like will help people be more comfortable with it. Definitely, our legal system is very behind, and I've said this before in previous lectures. Like data, there's just not many laws on what kind of permissions go with that and who owns what. So we're gonna need proper laws to regulate how data collection works and how data distribution works, so that we're more comfortable with the nature of data being used by, you know, companies in the future for the benefit of humanity as a whole. Like, I really think transcription technologies should, I mean, they should be here already. Like, we've had the technology for a while. It's just the legal framework is a big component to why it's hard to adopt these currently.
you could imagine that, the legal profession could change as AI sort of eliminates a lot of the human jobs and speeds up things, so that, discovery and other aspects of the legal profession just become much faster and streamlined. And so, yeah, now it always seems like they're racing to catch up with the rest of society, but it could be the other way around. That the lawyers are way ahead of us, so even that can't be absolutely predicted.
Yeah. Yeah, like I see just human emotion being more valuable in the future, since those are going to be roles that AI won't be able to fill. Not saying that we'll never be able to fill, but in the next few hundred years or so, I think it's going to be a transitory stage for everyone. And so, more jobs in the arts, for example, more teachers getting more pay, like those things to emphasize how important human emotion is, how important, and like, as human labor diminishes, there won't even be that much value in that at all. So moving that income over and, showing the shift in society, prioritizing the expression of human emotion, and just all deliberations on that matter, that's where I view the future to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
Just a thought that came up when you mentioned like the diminishing of human labor. I guess that would also ease up the strain on the medical system, because you may have less things like chronic pain
Yep.
due to, more physical labor. So I don't know, that could also be a factor that, in addition to AI, just eases up a lot of the workload for medical practitioners.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex, do you want to take us through your presentation?
Yeah, totally. Okay. One sec. Alrighty. So yeah, I've tried to make this as accessible as possible, but I mean, there's probably places where I haven't done a super awesome job. So definitely let me know if I'm saying something just like, well, what is that? Or what are you talking about? You're saying, definitely let me know. Okay, so to begin with, what I'd like to talk about is ways of taking narrow AI and framing it in a way so that it functions and feels almost like AGI. And that's what this little word soup thing here basically says. And surprisingly, there actually are people working on this kind of thing, which is pretty neat. Microsoft Research in particular read this AMA I don't know, 3 weeks ago. And yeah, this isn't some sort of crazy pipe dream thing. Apparently, people are building giant models with tons and tons of parameters to try and learn general world things. I'd like to first really quickly recap strong versus weak, narrow versus general. You got this before, so I'll just breeze through this. I thought some fun metaphors would make it really memorable and really easy to remember. And the first one, strong AI to weak AI, is like an architect to a carpenter. It's basically it's imperfect, but strong AI is able of taking this really vague task specification, like build a house, and it's able to build you a house. But the question is, what kind of house, what materials, what specification? It's kind of left up to whatever implicit bias the strong AI has learned over its lifetime, over what data we trained it on. So as such, it must use whatever implicit knowledge it has to determine optimal solution. For example, if it interacted with only people that wanted 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and then you ask it to build a house, it will build a house with 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, despite you not explicitly telling it that. Whereas a weak AI has more of I've trained it to solve a very specific problem, like playing chess or playing Go, and it will do exactly that, but absolutely nothing else. Similarly, AGI is narrow AI as a scientist to an engineer. And the important thing to say here is that AGI is capable of taking knowledge it's learned in the world and exploiting that to form new knowledge, which exploits that new knowledge, so on, so on, so on, to like generate way more knowledge. So that's how it learns to solve tasks it's never solved before. At least by the way that AGI people define it, it has to learn like generalizable behaviors, which are useful for doing a variety of things. Like for example, you could train an AGI on like some subset of cooking tasks, like frying an egg, toast, and then when like frying an egg, toast with jam, and say that you want a crumpet with jam. It must use the generalizable behavior of spreading jam on some bread-like thing and this idea of making bread in order to make this crumpet with jam. Whereas narrow AI would never be able to do that. It's constrained solely on the information that we've given it prior. And this is definitely not to demean weak like narrow AI. Like the stuff that narrow AI has done in the past couple of years has been absolutely nuts. For just a couple of like examples of what narrow AI is capable of, we have the big like golden one here of AlphaGo. And AlphaGo was this Go bot that a bunch of really smart dudes at DeepMind built. It beat the world champion Lee Sedol pretty decisively, which is very cool. So badly he quit. They also kept going with various harder and harder problems. Another really cool one being AlphaStar, where they built a StarCraft bot that was like almost world class. It beat North American pros, but wasn't able to beat Korean pros. And for like the not game related example that's still super seminal, I would go with AlphaFold by DeepMind as well. Just keeping with the DeepMind theme. I don't know very much about this problem, but apparently it revolutionized protein folding and just absolutely crushed everybody else at the competitions that they have around this. All right, now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So you can read this if you want. It's kind of word soup, in my opinion, kind of a big mouthful. And it took me a while. I don't know if you're anything like me, it took me a while to grasp this. I'll read it out regardless. The creation and study of synthetic intelligences with sufficiently broad, i.e. human level scope, strong generalization capability is at bottom qualitatively different from the creation and study of synthetic intelligences with significantly narrower scope and weaker generalization capability. That is a mouthful, and that was even hard for me to say. So let's break it down really, really carefully and then give a formulation that we can actually work with. It's kind of philosophical, not really practical, very hard to do anything very useful with it immediately. Yeah, what did I just read? So sufficiently broad, i.e. synthetic intelligence is sufficiently broad. It just means that the scope of tasks the agent can solve is super big. Like you can solve basically anything the observers are thinking about. Strong generalization capability in sufficiently broad, i.e. human level scope, and strong generalization capability just means that I can tell the agent, say I tell the agent to cook an egg. And when the agent cracks the egg and puts it in the pan, I can specify, hey, I want sunny side up. You're altering the task, but it's not to the point of it being unsolvable, and it's still the same task. And I'm going to be intentionally a little bit murky about what is like a modification and what is a new task, because it's really hard to talk about. You'd have to like say, okay, I have all these tasks, and I have some way of saying, like telling the distance between like a task and a modification, and I have to like constrain that. It's really gross, and it's mainly like a technicality. It doesn't really help anyone. Now time for the big mouthful. At bottom, qualitatively different from the creation study of ... So basically, the observer themselves have to say that, yeah, you are smart and you know how to do this thing. The observer himself is constrained by their own intelligence, and they're also constrained by what they see the agent is doing, what they perceive the agent to be doing. The agent doesn't actually have to solve the task. The agent has to do it so that the observer perceives that they've solved the task. This is very, very interesting and very useful for like framing this AGI as just solving some narrow AI problem. And it's probably the biggest hole in the core AGI hypothesis, assuming that my formulation is faithful. This is hopefully the only wall text, and I only have it here because I couldn't really figure out a way to make it smaller. So let's say there's a set of observers, which could be us, and let's say they're verifying the intelligence of some AGI. We ask anything we can think of, basically. Note that the agent doesn't have access to this, observe the agent doing the thing. Like I can tell the agent, cook an egg, and it will observe the agent, and then we will all observe the agent, and then we'll say, yes, did you cook the egg, or no, you did not cook the egg. And it has to, the overwhelming majority of us have to agree. And the reason why overwhelming majority and not consensus is because there can't really be a perfect strong AI. What is considered to be complete or optimal is dependent on the observer. And this leads to a very awkward problem where we have like a task such as solve world hunger or something, and suppose that the agent solves it. There may be some of us that say, oh yeah, it's totally fine. Some of us say, not really solved yet. Which is why I kind of have to maybe unsatisfyingly say overwhelming majority instead of consensus. And the observers can impose modifications to the task so long as they're not disruptive, yada, yada, yada. It's kind of, this is also kind of vague once again, mainly just so we don't get bogged down in technicalities and whatever, which don't really matter for the high level picture. All we care about right now is just like at a high level, what is this idea? Cool thing is that we don't really need to do anything more when it comes to formulating tasks. We can just stick with the RL task formulation. And the reason being is that the big problem is that we could run into something known as the task being not Markovian. And what that means in English is that I don't have all the information I need to solve this problem. But remember that we have to solve the problem to the satisfaction of the observer. We can only do as good as the observer would have done. So by definition, since we have all the information that that the observer would have access to, it's not Markovian. So we can still take the same thing over again, which is super awesome. Don't really need to fiddle with any of that. And another cool thing is that tasks that may seem to be like, oh yeah, I have to, our goal isn't actually to solve every task on the planet. Our goal is to just satisfy the observers. So the observers tell us what we need to know in order to solve the task, and then we execute our behavior depending on what the observers tell us. So it's not actually this huge multitask space, it's a huge state space instead, which is very important because we no longer have to frame it as this like solve everything in this like giant task bucket. We can instead just say, oh yeah, we're gonna set up an environment where you get instructions and you solve that task that the instructions specify, and then we move on with our lives. Another really cool thing which makes this actually doable is that tasks that seem to have multiple objectives are actually singular. So there's like a really easy way to see this, and it's probably easiest to see with example. Again, for just staying like high level, not getting bogged down in any details or whatever. Suppose you have a problem where you're like, I'm an AGI and I want to drive safely without hitting any potholes to the satisfaction of whatever observers. So there will be situations where I have to either drive safe or hit a pothole. And the question is, what do I do? Or like I have to drive safe and like trying to avoid the pothole, but not really, I can't really tell. The observer themselves must verify if the agent's acting intelligently. They have some way of implicitly merging these two objectives together in their head. Like they might say, oh yeah, I'll take a quarter or 3/4 drive safely and 1/4 pothole goodness or whatever. The point is the agent doesn't know this and we don't care. We just want to satisfy the observer. So anything that's multiple objective is actually singular, which is super awesome. Again, we don't really have to worry about that again. Okay, so theoretically, everything is laid out. It could be possible. The question now is, what exactly are we missing from current machine learning and artificial intelligence? And this is just my opinion. It's definitely not comprehensive. And this is what I believe to be the bigger impediments. I totally could have missed out on some that were important. Let's begin with causal reasoning. Okay, so let's talk really, really briefly about what the hell causality is, because I feel like it's not like super intuitive unless you look at examples. So let's just say that, for example, I'm a dude living in a world and I've only ever seen the sidewalk being wet when it has rained. So I might incorrectly learn that the sidewalk being wet implies that it has rained. But if there was somebody who came along and threw a bucket of water on the sidewalk and I observed that the sidewalk is wet, I might incorrectly say that it has rained when it hasn't. Some dude's just thrown water on the sidewalk. That's what's known as like a confounding variable, which impedes correlation, which is what I've learned. I've learned to correlate the rain with the sidewalk being wet, with causation being that the rain causes the sidewalk to be wet. We don't really do this right now. And we haven't really thought about this for a long time, mainly because it was so hard to do even correlational arrays. Thankfully, very, very recently, there's been a huge surge in causality in the theoretical machine learning literature, not so much in the practical yet. So the big thing with causality is that we don't really have a way of saying, oh yeah, this agent's really good at causal reasoning versus this other agent's really good at causal reasoning. Like in the reinforcement learning literature, for example, we have tons of ways of doing this, ranging from really trivial problems to harder problems like Atari to really big problems like robot navigation and all that funky stuff. In my opinion, it just needs more time and hands, but it's hard to say. Another thing as well is that it's very expensive to do these kinds of experiments in comparison to just correlational experiments. For correlational, we just get the data, we run the thing, and then we keep going. It reaches something in reinforcement learning like in terms of like how much it costs you to do these experiments. And for big problems, it becomes very difficult to like make lots of serious progress, which is a huge, huge, huge barrier. Because there are problems that you can frame as exactly causational, like explain to me why this thing happens the way it does. Like I could give a task like literally that sidewalk example. And if the AGI has only ever seen the sidewalk being wet when it's rained, then it may make that incorrect causal assumption. There's like lots of ways that we can get around this. Oh, I guess there's lots of ways that we could get around this. A good example would be counterfactual reasoning. Now, what is this? Now, this is like, I suppose that I pick up a coffee mug and I drink the liquid in it, and I burn myself because the coffee is hot. I might say that in order to not burn myself, I would not pick up the coffee mug. It's helpful and correct, but it's not really useful for doing causal reasoning. You could get a bunch of these and like kind of assemble together some good hypotheses, but it wouldn't give you causal reasoning, which is what we wanted. So we kind of have to throw that out. And there's also this problem of like all these causal counterfactual statements being all correct, but kind of vagus. Like they're all correct, but they're not really like helpful for painting the big picture. For some reason I didn't have a slide about that. I thought I did. I had deleted it by accident or something. Another thing that's huge and it's a big problem is how do we generate and test hypotheses effectively in this sort of causal reasoning kind of framework? There's something cool here in that we can use correlational models. We can use these ideas to get intuition about the world, and then use that to generate hypotheses, and then from that design causal experiments in order to test that. It's a huge problem in science. We mainly just rely on human intuition to guide hypothesis generation and experimentation as well. This hasn't really been explored at all from what I can see, and it probably needs a lot more work. There's a big bounty on this though. It's just like, if somebody were to figure out better ways in order to do this, it would have huge implications for science, but it's probably just a very, very hard problem. Going on further, I'll talk about explainability and interpretability. So like the main problem here is that we mainly design these, computer scientists kind of have this like perception where they want to do everything for themselves. And they don't really, well, I wouldn't say that's necessarily true, but at least in interpretable and explainable machine learning, we design everything for ourselves and we study things that are useful for ourselves. So like the current approach is that I'm going to take a thing and I'm going to fit it to something really simple, which I can explain. Like, for example, something really, like a really useful basic example for explaining a concept like linear regression for house prices is that I might take the number of rooms times 10 plus the square footage times 2.1 plus like 1 or I don't know 100 if you allow dogs and 0 if not, so on, so on, so on. And that's super easy to explain. Like, why does a house cost this amount? I can just go through and literally give you how much each component of the house contributes to the costs. But for something like a deep learning model, it becomes impossible. There's no way, or it becomes, basically so big that you can't get a reasonable interpretation out of it. Now, why is this a problem for, Now, what we would normally do is we say, okay, for like this little tiny part where we want to explain one particular output of our deep learning model, we'll just scatter that point around a little bit and then fit a simpler model, fit a linear regression. And then we can talk about how much everything is worth. And now, why is this a problem for us? Well, you could literally just say, I'm going to give you a task, which is literally explain how you did the task that you did. And, sorry, it seems I've skipped ahead of myself. Another big problem with explainability is that we aren't really able to tell if our explanations are totally correct. When we fit the simpler model, we lose a lot of information, and we might make some incorrect assumptions. And there's no good way of even quantifying what this means. And it's currently an open problem in interpretable and explainable machine learning. And another big thing is that the way we communicate our explanations right now is we just fit a simpler model and then we let an expert explain that to the lay people. There's like this major step missing between explainability via simpler model and explainability in a language that everybody can understand. And how is this going to be done? Through diagrams, language, counterfactual explanations, possibly causal graphs, i.e. like this causes this, which causes this. And all these can be framed as tasks for the AGI to solve, which is the like major obvious immediate impediments. If we can't do this, and if we can't even formulate this and script it in like some like orchestrated way, there's no way we're going to be able to do it organically. There is something that we're intrinsically missing in the way that we approach machine learning today, which is incapable of doing such a thing, which is a major impediment. Sorry. There's a question going to pop up. All good. Going on further, we're going to talk a little bit about robustness. And why is this even important? Recall that our goal is to just satisfy as many of us as possible. We just need to reach that threshold for saying, no, this is intelligent, to yes, this is intelligent. Going further doesn't really get us anything more under the core AGI hypothesis. So something kind of neat is that the agent that just sucks up to a few observers at the cost of others is not optimal. It's better to be a shallow people pleaser agent under the core AGI hypothesis, because all we want to do is just maximize the amount of people that think we're intelligent. So now, how do we do this? Is we want to act in a way that is seen as good by pretty much everybody, but we don't want to act in a way that is seen. We probably don't want to act in a way that's seen as optimal if the expense is to do worse in other people's eyes. A good example of this again would probably be the driving example I brought up earlier, or I'm like driving safe versus hitting potholes. I probably want to, in general, pick the driving safe over potholes because that probably mirrors the bias of most of the observers better. And there's also something very interesting here in that we have to like learn some sort of model over our observers and what their beliefs are. And then we need to optimize with respect to that in a way that is not just the normal way. Like normally we just say, okay, forget it. We just want to please everybody as much as possible on average. Framing the problem in a way so that I want to please everybody just so that it's above this amount, if possible, is actually very, very computationally expensive and difficult. And even we haven't come up with a good approximation for this yet, which is a huge problem. I think this phrases what I was going to say. Yeah, so as long as everything is good to everybody's, or to most people's perception, we're intelligent. So we should be robust to this kind of measure as opposed to being robust to the average person. Lastly, we have something very, very interesting in my opinion. The perception of an observer solving a task properly depends on how you solve a task. For example, if I were to tell you to walk 100 meters forward and you crab walk, are you solving the task I set out for you to do? Not really. I implicitly wanted you to walk upright and bipedally. I'm biased with respect to the way that I have seen the world up until now, even though I didn't specify that in my task formulation. Like there needs to be so much implicit knowledge that the AGI just soaks up through either explicit data that the AGI has seen or via experimentation. Now, you could argue that, okay, I could do this crab walk, then I could tell you that, no, you're doing it incorrectly, and then I could try something else. But there is this problem of I could crab walk, or I could walk some other weird fashion, or I could walk upside down or something. And we want to do this in as few shots as possible. So we want to use something known as imitation learning. And what is that? It's really simple. We just want to mimic the behavior of something else. But something very interesting that imitation learning doesn't have right now is this idea of learning generalizable behaviors. We kind of just mimic for things that we know how to mimic, and then for whenever we encounter something new, we are completely lost at sea. Like, we will just fail and we have no clue what to do, and everything's just broken. What we need to do for imitation learning is develop some sort of process which allows us to learn generalizable behaviors, which we can then apply to different tasks in as few shots as possible, which has not been explored very well in the literature, to the best of my knowledge. And to wrap it up, there's a really neat issue with the core AGI hypothesis, which suggests that maybe a reframing is needed, or that it's possibly outdated. The agent itself only has to please the viewers. So an agent can exist which pleases the viewers but does not actually solve the task. A snake oil salesman agent, which is kind of interesting, because then the question is, how do we verify if an agent is intelligent if we are not even able to verify its intelligence? It's very open-ended, and I haven't really seen a solution in the AGI literature nor the narrow AI literature. And it's a question of, I don't even know if there exists a good solution. Yeah, so that pretty much summarizes everything I'd like to talk about for that. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, definitely let me know.
I have a really quick question. Just an extension for that that last part there. What kind of reward system could work if you're not using the observer's perceived the observer judging the agent if they did the right thing or not? What other reward system would you use? And like, could that validate alternative behaviors that we might not view as correct but could still do the task at hand?
By definition, we have to use the viewer perception. That is true, though. You could totally pick a different thing, but then at least according to the core AGI hypothesis, it wouldn't be AGI anymore, I believe. But to be honest, I'm not really sure. Kim, you're muted. Sorry.
Could you unshare so
sorry.
so that we can see everybody? Yeah. So this issue of the observer, it seems to me the most important challenges for AI are ones where the observer can agree that the AI has succeeded in the task, but by definition cannot understand why, because it's something humans can't do. There are probably lots of important things like that, at least 6 of them: the problems of male aggression, nuclear war, climate emergency, systemic racism, the COVID pandemic, and colonialism, right? All of those 6, we've shown over and over again, like, humans alone can't fix those things, right? So I think AI probably can fix them, and the observers will be able to confirm that they are fixed, but they won't be able to understand why, right? Because probably it's more complicated than what the human brain can actually, appreciate. And any one of them that you might pick, and I think protein folding is the same. So that something that AI has already solved is much too complicated for us to understand. We accept that AI has solved it, but that doesn't mean we know how to do it now. We just found something external to us that can do it. So tell me, is it important that the observer understand how the solution works, because I would argue that in those 6 examples, that's not possible, that it is possible for AI to solve it. But no matter how much explainable AI tries to explain it, human brains are not going to be able to figure it out.
That's interesting. Actually, yeah, it's very interesting. What
do you think?
Just okay, assuming that the like core AGI hypothesis, I don't know, I just picked it because it was the most cited like way that people think about core AGI, AGI and what it means to be AGI versus narrow AI. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it's not sufficient. I'm not sure, because you're totally correct in that. Well, I guess I could say for AlphaFold, for example, I do not understand how it works, but I can agree that it has solved its task sufficiently. So it definitely is a check mark for me, but at the same time, I don't understand how it works.
Right, and I think those other things that I named, which are more important than protein folding, are not more complicated than protein folding. So that since AI can solve protein folding, AI can solve those other 6 things, and we will benefit very much from that. But are you troubled by the fact that we'll never really know how the fixes occurred? Is that okay with you? Or do you think we will somehow? How will, I mean, it's clear these are things we're sort of butting our heads against for decades without really solving. So, you know, that's pretty close to a proof that humans alone cannot solve these things, right? So AI comes in and solves it. Are we then creeped out by the fact that we now have this idyllic world, a world that everybody likes? You know, pollution is gone, and you know, if a man tries to gets in his head to beat up another man, some unseen force comes out. Now, no, boys, and just separates the two. Yeah, so all those things happen. It's a great world, but is it troubling that we don't know how it works? All the important good things about this new world, we cannot understand. Is that a problem or not?
That's a that's a very good question. I believe that's a big problem with the core AGI hypothesis. It's very hard. Another thing too is that when you're talking about like those kind of big world questions, we have to define some sort of utility, which we use, and we have to maximize over some sort of utility. And
but it's easy, really. I mean, when you say, well, what is this climate emergency? I'll come back to you and say, is Miami flooded or not? If it's flooded, then you haven't fixed the emergency. And if it's not, you have, right? So there are ways to immediately simplify every single one of them. So that it's all like, is Miami flooded? Yes, no. Okay. Yes, then you failed, and no, you have. You've succeeded. So so it isn't hard to figure out whether success was attained, because you can simplify what success looks like. And certain things, like whether Miami's underwater or not, tracks pretty well with whether you succeeded with the overall task. And so now let's talk about the future, where machines are way smarter than we are. Okay, take over the future agenda of the world, and we can only understand what's going on if we combine with them in some way. So wouldn't it be true that, like with machine implants in our head, we would eventually be able to understand how these problems have been solved once the machine part of our brains is more than 50%. Then we'd have this, eureka moment. Okay, now I get it. Now I see how AI solved these things because I'm no longer predominantly human in my thinking. I'm more, machine thinking than, human or more non-biological. And so that's the only way to really be in tune with how things are really working now. And is that a sort of troubling scenario? Would you like a future where human brains are still more than 50% biological? Is that like a defining thing for you, or doesn't it matter?
I mean, it totally depends on like what I don't know. It's very hard because I can lay out what I think is like best for me, and that will depend on it. I guess you could. Well,
But
it's very hard.
if you think about what humans can do versus machines, like let's take understanding human happiness. Probably machines will understand human happiness better than we do, will be more skilled at attaining it, right? So if you have a society they create, the humans in it will be happier than they will be in a human created society, even though they'll be kind of frustrated that it turned out that way, but it still feels better. Everything's better. You're more free, you're more fulfilled. You feel that your life is fuller than it ever was when humans were in charge. It's always bunches of blank space when you thought of yourself before, and now all those blank spaces are filled in, and you feel like, if Maslow's pyramid still exists, you're toward the top somewhere, Yeah.
Actually, yeah, now that you mention it, if you had like a perfect model of everybody, and from that we had like, because we can model everybody, we can model what they believe would maximize their own utility. You could base your decision. In theory, this is like a ton of computation, a ridiculous amount, probably more that will ever be available. But you could make the action always and maximize the utility, or whatever everybody perceives their utility to be for everyone. And you could make decisions that were the best. And then as people change, the model would reflect that if it's perfect. And you could just continuously make your decisions optimized to this model and have this feedback loop. So in principle, yeah, but practically, I doubt it.
Well, aren't you positing that total intelligence in the world reaches a limit, can't exceed some limit? But why would that be true? It's true of, biological intelligence, but it's not true of, machine intelligence. Why should that ever reach a limit? So if you can't ever reach a limit, then you will be able to solve that optimization, right?
There are some problems out there with respect to this that are what you call an MP hard. They require like something like exponential in like the amount of things you have to solve. So like for like 100 instances of a problem, it would take like e to the power 100 or something, just like.
But isn't it because you're thinking of standard physics? If you use quantum, then you're able to shortcut, like even protein folding. If you were to describe how protein folding works, then if we say, well, how long will it take? It will take to the end of the heat death of the universe for one protein to fold properly if you use classical physics. Whereas quantum can make it happen, almost instantly. So wouldn't the same thing apply here? That, you're thinking of kind of a classical physics kind of world, right? Whereas there will be quantum-like things where the rules just change, and
hopefully
things are possible that wouldn't be otherwise.
it would be a very different world if we could solve MP problems. There's so many things which we just abandon because it's computationally just ridiculous. Like there's no way we'd be able to do it. It'd be a very neat world, but I don't know a ton about like how this would work.
Well, you know, if you look at Jack Tazinski's lecture where there's this huge audience retention peak at the end. So he's going along and then he starts talking about all the textbooks will be rewritten. Yeah, and so on. So a lot of people all over the world have gone back in to look at that end part of the lecture. But he also talks about protein folding and how by quantum physics, it really can't happen. It's too complicated. It would take, you know, billions of years for proteins to fold. Yeah. So that's also interesting, and it's in the same part of the lecture. So yeah. So yeah, Tian, thanks for that input. Yeah, I don't want to, you know, eat up the entire
Oh
rest
yeah,
of the
and yeah, I'm sorry
class
about that.
period talking about this, but I do think that it's important to realize that we have at least those 6 problems that I named that humans and human institutions are incapable of solving. I mean, they talk about them and over again. They fail and fail and fail, right? So they cannot solve them, but they need to be solved, right? Or it'll be a terrible world. So that's really, those 6 things are what AI should be working on. And, you know, so like, what can we do? I think one thing we can do is simply advocate for that, right? Name the 6 things and say, okay, listen, we know because, you know, AlphaFold solved protein folding, that AI is capable of doing these other things. Let's get her done, you know, let's make it
The thing
happen.
with like protein folding is that like you can do this a bunch of times and get a ton of data and just fit a model, which is essentially what they did. And like for other things such as like racism, how it's like at least in the way that we think about it today, it is to me, maybe there's like a good way to frame it that I don't know about. Very hard to frame it as like a
No,
narrow
but
end.
if you think of microaggressions, right? Like something that I'm sure you faced thousands of times, where you're saying Black Lives Matter and somebody else is saying all lives matter, and then tries to kind of take the meat out of the little, you know, arguments. And so that's a quantifiable thing, right? You could say, okay, in that conversation, how many microaggressions were there? And you can, you know, define that and look at it. So it isn't, it's just like, is Miami flooded or not? If you get the world so that those microaggressions taking the life out of the arguments that you're making by making these other little comments, if that stops happening, well, the rest of it will also get better. Just like if, you know, Miami isn't flooded, the other big coastal cities won't be, right? So I don't think it's impossible. And yeah, so anyway, okay, on to the last presentation.
Hello.
Hello.
I do have a class at 3:30. If we're not able to, like, are we able to reschedule? Because if not, I can skip it. It's fine.
Well, it would give us 4 presentations Thursday, but no, I think we, how many of you can stay after 3:30. I mean, I think most of you can, right? So our session then on Thursday will go until 4. So that's fine. So why don't we just do it that way? Because otherwise, I think it isn't really fair to you to have you working under these time pressures. And if you think in the future about why this happened on this Tuesday, it's all related to narrow and general AI, right? Blame them, blame the machine. It's those darn machines that put your presentation off to Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to mention something earlier, but you guys were having a really good discussion and I didn't want to intrude.
Yeah, yeah. No,
sorry, I didn't think things would go this long.
Yeah, well, it's just these are, exciting. They're all exciting topics. And I wanted to point out, my graphic here, no one in the history of the course has ever talked about asteroid mining. So that's becoming something that's more and more interesting. So I predict that like next term, somebody will pick that as a subject. Yeah, no, I'm happy. Let's limit today to these 2 presentations, and we'll do the 4 on Thursday. And you can go first on Thursday, so you don't have to worry. If your presentation goes beyond 3:30 on Thursday, you're in deep trouble, young ladies. Anyway, and everybody will think unkind thoughts about you. Yeah. So giving a 90-minute presentation will make you really unpopular. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. I think this has been a very good session today, and thank you all. And we'll see you back here on Thursday for the final session of the course. Yeah.
Nadia, say your question.
What?
Right. I was just thinking earlier on when y'all were discussing these big problems and how AI would solve them. How would we judge that AI would solve them, right? The observers still have to come into play. So how do we choose observers? And what if the observers don't agree that this big problem is solved, right? So for example, systematic racism, each observer's experience of whether the AI has solved the problem or not will probably be vastly different. So we may have disagreement between observers. So I think maybe the biggest limitation is just the dependence on humans. Sorry, I just have my knitting here. The dependence on human intelligence to evaluate whether AI is successful or not. Is there any way to bypass this observer problem?
No, there. I think you not only want to know that systemic racism has been solved overall, but that the identifiable target groups also, when considered alone, they also feel that it's solved. So people of color, Asians, women, every transgender people, so on, every target group that you can think of, they also should be able, as a group, to identify the fact that this has been solved. And if they don't, then you haven't really solved it, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's exactly why we have robustness built in, or why we should use robustness when trying to solve this kind of problem. It's so that everybody gets the minimum acceptance with respect to whatever task you're trying to solve. So yeah. I'm actually very glad.
Yeah, so I mean, this is not unsolvable. I mean, that's one of the exciting things about today, It is that I would argue there's every evidence that this stuff is all solvable. All 6 problems are solvable, and we've got kind of proof that things of that, complexity have already been solved. So we should stop making up excuses for why it can't be done and actually get people to do it. Right?
I mean, I think humans can solve the problems on their own, but my hot take is that as long as it's not profitable to solve it, that problem won't be solved. At least with the climate crisis, we've seen such a huge peak in sustainability movements and sustainability products because there's that realization that that's now a profitable market. Whereas 30 years ago, there wasn't that same market or profitability when it came to solving the climate crisis.
If it's clear that humans are not going to solve it because the motivations are wrong, that's the same as not being able to solve it. You could say, well, if humans weren't motivated by greed, yeah, but no, but they are. So yeah. So anyway, we need AI to help us. Okay, thank you, and we'll see you on Thursday. Okay, take care.